You are listening to the Bring Joy Forward podcast. Conversations to explore, heal, and grow. You can find us on bringjoyforward.com and join us in our community group on Facebook. We now take you to the episode. Thank you for joining us. Hi, I am Shannon with Imagine Media, and I'm joined by Marlisa McLaughlin from Marlisa Energy. And we are both guides here at Bring Joy Forward. We wanted to have a conversation today about something that is often not talked about and hidden away, or it's just, a subject that not everybody likes. But for those of us who are going through it, it is our life. And so we're here to talk to you about grief. And my grief journey started when I was very young. I was about 10 years old, and started with a paternal and a maternal grandparent. And then about 5 years ago, my son Zach died of an overdose at the age of 22 and brought grief into harsh reality for me. And so I've spent the last 5 years learning how to walk with that. And I use the term walk with grief because that's what I'm doing every day, every moment. And so it's how to actively do that, walking towards joy, which is what we're all about here at Bring Joy Forward. So Marlisa, if you want to share a little bit about your story too, start us out.
Sure. Hi, I'm Marlisa, and my journey with grief and experiences with loss started quite young. My mom was diagnosed with terminal illness when I was 5, and just before I turned 7, she passed. And it was an interesting time because it was the 70s, and my mother didn't want her daughters to see her declining. She didn't want to put us through. It was that was the mentality at the time in that period where you don't bring the children into the reality. And as a result, I wasn't really walked through that whole process. And then very soon after, we had tragedy very close to us for the next 11 years. We had a neighbor who was 7, the age of my sister at the time. Her best friend and her dad had a terrible boating accident. And then we had more boating accidents with relatives and a lot of abrupt loss. I used to go to sleep at night praying and begging to please don't take the rest of us who were here. So I grew up with that in a culture that didn't want to talk about grief. Like my own grandmother, who had lost her mother at the age of 3, never wanted to show tears. She tried to be strong for us. And as a result, it really pushed the reality and the acceptance of loss into a hidden place. And I began to use those experiences to help others as I began to move closer into teenage years and experience more loss, quite close loss, and began to develop an understanding that I had survived all of that suffering and was able to begin to adapt in ways that I could help others. So just recently in 2018, my father was diagnosed with the same terminal illness as my mother had died from. And I didn't know how I wanted to spend those remaining months. He was given 3 months to live. And I chose to try to write a book because he always supported me in trying to write a book, and I hadn't published. So I was hoping I could put anything together on paper so he could pass feeling fulfilled in his support as a father to a daughter. And when I found a writing coach, I had this half-finished creative nonfiction novel started, and I thought that was going to be it. And she said, no, I don't do those things. I only help people who work in wellness and want to try to promote their business and get people to understand what they're doing. And being an energy worker and a healer and a sound practitioner, she said, well, what do you specialize in? And I said, well, I do a lot of different things, but I have a lot of experience with grief. And she said, well, why don't you write about grief? Like, you're going through it right now. And it took me 3 years. I've yet to finish publishing. But what I learned through the process of trying to write that and reach people from all different levels of grief was something that I developed a perspective on, which is vibrant grieving, which is very akin to what Shannon was talking about, that you live and walk with the experience integrated. It's not a start and end process. And one of the things that we can't do is not feel the pain, right? Well, we can find ways to numb it down, but we feel it at some level. So what we need to do is figure out ways to shift and move and integrate the loss so that we can live with it and not ruin our health. Hence the title Vibrant Grieving, to keep the energy vibrant in the body. And that's where we're at today. And Shannon and I always end up having very rich and deep and meaningful conversations, not just about grief, about everything, but in particular, we're hoping we can bring to you ways to not just survive the loss, but to live and walk with it in a way that makes your vibrancy more vibrant, even though you can still honor and feel.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you touched on so many things in there that kind of why we're together. 2018 is when my world exploded. And, so the two of us coming into this space so often, and we've had these conversations multiple times through the years, both as supportive friends and, as talking about things that have gone on around us or something that we've seen happen in the world. And it's often about that conversation of healing and open conversation. There's a lot that comes at you as a person that's grieving and going through, something that is on every level just unexplainable, right? Because grief is one of those things that is so strange of an animal. It comes at you in so many different directions and ways. And, right now I'm talking about it with clarity and no tears, right? But in 3 minutes that could change because of some emotion that runs through your body and some memory and some place that you go, right? And it all depends on all of these external aspects that are coming at you. You touched a little bit about your upbringing and how that affected your grieving process. So my space in that, we talked very openly, but my family uses humor for a lot of things, and grief is no exception to that. And after my vovô died, who so that's grandfather in Portuguese for those of you following along, when he died, there was this process afterwards where my vovô wasn't really sure how to handle all of that, and so she it was like a running joke in our family where she would always be like, okay, this is yours. You're going to get this when I die. And so we talked about death all the time, but it was not in a healing way. It was just, open conversations. And it got to be so much so that, because we all would gather as a family and exchange gifts and, the whole extended family. And so one year my dad actually gave her a basketball for Christmas, just as a joke, which of course everybody found amusing. And we, talked very openly about why that basketball was a gift, and well, might as well give you things that I want when you die. Right. But, so I have always been able to talk about it. But I hadn't looked at it in terms of healing until I was thrown into it. And so for me, I did a lot of things for myself to be able to survive, because at the beginning for me, it was survival. It was strictly, how do I get through every second of every single day? And so it was that constant attempt to keep going, which was the term that kept coming to me. And for me, somehow right at the beginning, that keep going mentality was just driving everything that I was doing. So much so that even, after collapsing on the front steps of hearing the news, I was making jokes with the police officers, and I was very much coming from Zach. He was like me in a lot of ways, and the jokester, and so we would use laughter and as a term, and I was doing that day, and as my processing went on and I learned more how to tap into what I was doing for me, that's when the kind of change happened for me in terms of I use art and play in a lot of my healing processes, and that became because that's what worked so well for me, and so I brought that in with my personal coaching, and it became a necessity, I guess, more so for me to be able to help those that are not able to see past that, because there were so many things that I was able to do in order to be able to and I was a mess for a very long time. But I was working through that. And it's that act of working through, I think, where you and I connected so deeply on that, because we're constantly doing that. That never stops. We're always having those open conversations. And so that's what we're kind of hoping to bring to you with this podcast that we're doing, is to access all of those things and those tools and tips and things that have helped us along the way, but also to have those real conversations that often get hidden because of concerns about how society is going to look at something, or for me, a lot of that happened in the grieving process, where people don't know how to handle it when it happens and how to address it when you tell them. And I've always been a person who speaks very openly and very bold, and that did not change, but I did experience things that I had never experienced before in terms of me withdrawing from society. And I think that also is a contributing factor to why this is so important for me to have these conversations, because there are people out there who need that extra help in walking through this. Like we're going through it together. We're individually, you are alone in it. There's no question. But having that community space and the ability to find what's working for other people and different ways to do that, I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do here.
Oh, and validation is 1, 2, and 3, the most important thing, because we all grieve as different as our thumbprint. Like it's a very unique, it's networks and networks of life experience that are layered, like, the web of our existence, really. And our biology travels differently for different reasons, and all of these factors. And it just really is so sad to come across this. And I do so often in the grief support that I do find that people feel like there's a right way to do it, and if they're not doing it correctly, and so then again, like you said, Shannon, it's so isolating, and grief and loss is isolating in and of itself. And then to not be able to have that validation that what you're feeling, which nobody can, there's not a judgment, there's no right or wrong way, it doesn't even have a space for not being validated, but it is. And I think a lot of it is fear. People are afraid, and that isolates the griever even more. So we are here for you. We hear you. And we want you to be seen and felt and heard, no matter what's going on. And we want to be able to offer anything, even if it's saying nothing and just listening. So important.
It is so important. That aspect of, when you're grieving, it's a process that never stops. And grief isn't just about people, right? It's things too. Because of the, my situation, I get so many people who are in a state of grieving who almost feel like they have to compare. And these are even close people in my life, where they'll say, well, I know it doesn't compare to what you're feeling. And I'm constantly saying, it doesn't negate what you're feeling. This isn't a competition. But we're so trained to think that, there are stages and levels, and, yours is better than this, and mine is more difficult than that. And part of my hope is that we can start to throw all of that away and strip it aside and just be there for each other and be a little bit more compassionate, have a little bit more empathy. I know I was lucky enough that I didn't have to just jump right back into a workforce. But I have, people in my life who were not that lucky. They had to go back and function in society. And even today, 5 years later, I'm quote functioning in society, but there are times when I'm just like, nope, today's not the day. And that's a big hope for me too, is that we can help people to honor that and to
Mm.
have support in that, to give and receive support in that. And it's not a competition. I often say that, you know, loss and grief is love with no place to go. And the level of love, that's why are we comparing that, right? It's that's that emotion inside you that is so profound and so beautiful and so pure. And that love can be for a person, and it can be for an object, it can be for a thing that you're doing. So you're losing that. So if you change jobs, or you get a divorce, or you move to a different place, there's all of these different things that are various degrees. But they're for you, they're everything. And we need to honor that. We need to honor that space, and allow for it. I um, also have this need, I think, internally to um, educate, I guess, a little bit, for lack of a better term, because I'm not really thrilled with, going around and being the educator on the things, like my opinion and my views are, not any different or better than anybody else's. But I feel like there's this part of what we're doing, like there's this responsibility that comes with it. And it's for a lot of the small things, because people are people, and they don't always act and behave in a manner that's really supportive or appropriate. And especially with the state of the world, and you get the keyboard warriors that are on there, and they're just saying whatever they want to say, and that doesn't change because it's grief. You still have those things that happen. And so that, I think, contributes to that isolation,
Mhm.
where you're going through this horrible thing, and then you have people that are like making it about them, because they're curious about what happened, or they can't deal with their own idea of death, or what possibly coming, or what could happen to them, so that it just becomes about them. And I think we have to be more um, aware of that, and how we do that, in the world with each other, and have that compassion in there.
That's a top key word, compassion. And you just spoke to so many different things. And I also wanted to add, there are the losses that are not just the physical, or like moving, and new friendships, ends of relationships, but even ideologies. Because I was remembering that very first Christmas after my mother died, and it was before all the other deaths. And I realized that there was no Santa Claus, and I can't express the feeling I had. I can still remember what it was like when I used to think I saw Santa outside, crossing our picture window, looking out the living room window, and that place across the sky. And I knew when I was looking there that it was empty, and that it wasn't going to have that belief system anymore. And that was just as heavy as the loss
Mm.
of my mother. It was actually amplified by the loss of my mother, that loss. You can lose a
Yeah.
limb. You can lose, there are so many different things. Like you said, we're grieving every day, all day long, about something. We lose the breath as we exhale it. So it's a constant ability to rejuvenate and replenish as we give away, we take back. And that gets very grossly interrupted when we have
Yeah.
this type of suffering with a personal relationship that is incomprehensible until you experience that.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. Well,
yeah.
and you talked about, Santa and that ideology, right? Because it's hope.
Yes, there you
And
go. It's
yeah, and so it's that piece of you that needs something to hold on to, and then you start to question everything. It just it's this expansion of you going through, and everything that happened before. I always use the before and after analogy because for me, that's a very distinct line, right? I had experienced grief and pain and suffering, but for me, it was on a different level, And so, in my before, I had things that didn't come with me into my after, and then there were things that I just questioned, and then I was also opened up even further. I was connected spiritually, but for me, that was just, just this explosion, um, and this rawness, which I think the biggest thing in grief is it's so raw, and that's what makes everything so much more difficult. Like, even for me now, 5 years later, I'm walking around in the world, and I have a very different interaction with the world. I'm more sensitized to it. There are things that I can and cannot do anymore because of the way that it interacts energetically with
Yeah.
me, which is another thing that we're really trying to, I think, add to the discussion, which is that it the energy that flows in and around us and is innate. Grief is not excluded from how that reaction happens. And that there's this whole energy to life and death, right? And so, like, part of the healing is also understanding energy and how that works and how it works in your body, and ways that you can learn more about it and experience it so that you are healthier as you're grieving and as you're going through, that that difficulty in, I think, change. It's like the ultimate change, right? You can never, like, and for me, like, I was a person who never used never in my vocabulary, and so then never came. And now I'm going through life having to figure out how to do things with that, all of these things never. And that's that extended grief as well, right? Because we're all of the times that come in, like, my daughter just had the most absolutely beautiful wedding, her and her wife, gorgeous, and this beautiful celebration of love. Um, see, here's bubbling up. And one of my favorite moments from that experience is a group of us during a song that was to honor Zach, and we're from all different families. Her dad and I got divorced, and so there's extended, and stepsisters, and I had remarried, and my stepdaughter was there, and like we're just standing in this space of love, all of these different connections, honoring this life that, that this spiritual being brought into our lives. Um, and so that loss of, that's a never. He's not going to he's not going to be there for that. So that's her grief, my daughter's grief, my grief, everybody that's standing in their space. We're all different, and we're all experiencing that in a different way. And we all need to honor it in a different way, so that for me was such a beautiful moment, because we all came together in that same space and grieved the same way, and honored the same way and saw each other. And so that aspect of each additional grieving, each additional point of grieving that you have to do. But in society, we don't allow that. It's what is it? 3 days, the standard bereavement for work, 3 days. That's it. That's what you're allowed. And then you have to put on your big boy pants and go out into the world or whatever. That's the mentality that's been spewed at us really for, generations and generations. And this is part of my goal to break that. And let's look at it differently and just have that empathy and compassion as we walk through it together.
Definitely. And when you were talking about being an educator, to offer this and in replacement or alongside that, is that what we're hoping to do is shift your perspectives so that you can have a perspective that's organically coming from your own experiences, the lens that you can now see and feel both inside and out, that can shift the way you interact with the world and engage, so that you can have those types of beautiful experiences with other people or just alone out in nature, and really just being able to feel a sense of ease and still feel alive and still feel your loss, because grieving is also sacred. And I don't think that word comes enough into dialogue about the experience of how, as painful as it is an opportunity to step right up to the door of your own mortality and really understand beyond words how precious life truly is.
I love
So,
that. I
uh,
love that say I couldn't agree with you more on that. I love the term sacred and sacred journey, just kind of popped in my head as well. And um, that pause, right?
and it's a pause, isn't it, folks? I mean, you
Yeah.
can't get off the couch.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't take a breath. You have to push the breath through your body. I mean,
Yeah.
it is the heftiest of hefties.
Yeah.
But coming back to the energy, which is really where I landed in how to best integrate the experience of loss, so where it's not actually a process, it's a constant state of integrating, is looking at it from an energy standpoint. And so I'll be hopefully being able to help you with understanding what that means, and Shannon as well, like how do you move this energy? Because essentially what I've gathered, Shannon, is that when I was trying to define pain, and I did extensive research, what it really is blocked energy, right? Like if you're not hurting in your arm, you don't feel any pain. The energy's flowing. But if you get wounded or there's a block there somehow, your body it's blocking to give the attention to the cause. When you unblock it, it goes away. So that's also true for emotional instances.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we just want to keep the energy flowing. And it also then it takes that emotional aspect, all the stories and the memories and the stuff that just rips and tears at you when you're reliving that, breaking it down when you need that chance to take the pause to pure energetic terms. Like, I just need to take a breath, shift this biochemistry. It's really a matter of shifting your biochemistry.
Yeah.
And breaking it scientifically down so it kind of dries out the emotions just for a long enough period so you can live again in that next moment.
Yeah. I mean, I always say that, I was underwater just trying to break to the surface. So that dries out emotions. Like that's such a good connection in my brain anyway for that. You're just scrambling to get up there. And in terms of the physical aspect and how that, you're talking about blockages and everything. I still physically feel it in my heart. It is not as severe as it was, that for it was probably almost 3 years where I was holding that breath, and it took a energetic release. It took some, some chakra balancing and, some actual intentional energetic release to start tapping the hammer on the exterior stone of the heart, because that's exactly what it felt like for me. Like it was a constant ache and pain, so much so that I actually spoke to my doctor about it because I thought I was having a heart attack,
Well, and they do.
because
People
it was
do.
consistent. Oh
People
yeah,
do.
my physician told
Absolutely.
me that on average, you lose 10 years of your life when you experience that amount because of what it's doing. And I think that also contributed to me making even more of an effort to how do I work with this? How do I not be that statistic where I'm going to lose 10 years? How do I live with abundance? How do I go for that when I'm living with such a deficit? And for me,
And not
that's
feeling guilty for living. That's
that's
essential,
that's
right?
another, we'll touch on that in another podcast
That's
because
that's like 5
that's a
podcasts.
series. That's a series of podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think, because we're um we're wanting to try to keep these podcasts around 30 minutes in length, so we're gonna start to wrap this one up. But I want to touch on this a little bit in terms of that physical pain that you're feeling, and that actually making an effort. Like I said, you have to be intentional about taking that walk and allowing yourself, I always say, to walk towards the opportunity for joy. That's how I term it.
That's
Because
beautiful.
when you're in that state of just absolute devastation, there is no concept of joy. Joy doesn't exist. You are just trying not to drown, right? So if you can just every day keep walking towards that opportunity for joy and intentionally putting yourself in those situations for it. For me, I would go to the ocean, because the ocean is a space for me that I really connect to, but also I could see the island where my son took his last breath. I would walk the beach, I would connect to the earth, and I would look across, and I would have those conversations with him. And those are things that I still do. But that was an active intent and very much an effort to get out of the bed and to go do those things. And I think that's what I'm hoping I can do for people is give them that space to start stepping towards, allowing themselves, to walk towards those opportunities for joy. And that's what I hope to do in my book too, which is more of a memoir about my experience with a little bit of a inspire and empowerment aspect to it, to, give them the raw openness of what happened and how I talked about it. And then also ways to walk towards those opportunities, I guess.
That's so beautiful, Shannon. And I've read your
Thank
work.
you.
It's actually what re-inspired me when I couldn't figure out how to put everything that I figured out together so that it could make sense for you, whether you've just recently lost someone or if you've been grieving or not grieving, but suppressing grief for 10 or 15 years. That's
Yeah.
a really hard audience. How do you speak to those different levels? And your work, Shannon, was very powerful.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
Oh gosh. I just wanted to add, Takotsubo cardiomyopathy is actually the medical term for a heart attack that's broken heart syndrome. So you actually have the physiological medical records of having had a heart attack, only it wasn't
Yeah.
an actual heart attack. So it's a real
Yep.
thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's and another thing. Remember, is in Chinese medicine, the lungs are affected by grief. And,
Yeah.
think about it. Your rib cage is closing because your heart is heavy and you can't
Mhm.
open and breathe. After my dad died, I just so happened to have a doctor's appointment for a physical, an annual physical, and I felt really well. I had really um, been at peace with the situation with my dad, and I had been very present with it, and I didn't feel as though I had suppressed anything. And my doctor's like, guess what? You have pneumonia. And I said, pneumonia? I wasn't hacking or coughing or anything, but my lungs just, bam, they instantly
Yep.
got affected by the loss. So if
Yeah.
you are experiencing physical symptoms, even if it's years down the road, it could stem back to grief. It's a
Yeah,
real
absolutely.
thing.
And there is no timetable in all
No
of
time
this.
to no.
You're constantly kicking that back up, and and that's why it's an active work. You have to continuously go back, and it doesn't mean that you're living in there. And I think and maybe we'll end it with this concept and talk more about this the next time, but I think that was a struggle for me in the grieving aspect of it. There is a whole community of grievers who they just want to grieve.
This is
Like
so
that
true.
they want to live in that state of grieving. Like that is how they are in their mind honoring and processing. But in my opinion, that's not what's happening. They're not processing, they're not grieving, they're not honoring, they're not walking towards. They can't get past that initial just shut down of your entire being that happens with this grief. And then that fear type jumps in, and that inability to walk away from that thing or person that is causing that grief and holding on to it with everything you have. And that again is an active thing that you have to do. I mean, I moved from one part of the country to another part of the country, and there was my car was completely packed with things that I did not trust to a moving company. I needed to have it in my possession because I couldn't let go of it. And there are still things, and I will do that, I'm sure, until I take my last breath. But I actively release more and more and more, because you have to come to terms with it yourself, right? It has to be something that you do yourself. But if you're not actively working on it, you're never going to get there. If you're actively approaching grief as that's the thing that's important to you, that's where you're going to stay. You're going to stay in that constant state of grieving, instead of walking with grief. And I think that's a big difference.
I mean, I really would like to kind of help out with the languaging of that, to see if it's, because that could be a very triggering thing. And for those people who are, I would not want to say that they're not grieving. It's chronic grief, which is again a biochemical place of repatterning, like just recycling that emotion. And it has a lot to do with not wanting to let go. They're afraid that if they let go of that feeling, which they're somehow stuck in for many different reasons, they're going to let go of their loved one and not continue to honor. And that's scary and frightening, and it's painful. So there's so much to chronic grieving. And and I agree with you, Shannon. We have to help one another recognize when it's necessary to get completely incapacitated sometimes, right? But if it's beyond what's healthy for you, and it's going to have long-term detrimental effects, and you become more and more isolated, we hope we're going to be able to help you find those ways to pull out of that chronic state and begin to walk with your losses.
Yes, absolutely. So. And if you haven't picked it up already just by this first podcast, Marlisa is going to be the one that is going to give you the specific technical terms, because she is a wealth of knowledge, and she has all of those things tapped in her brain. And I always have to look them up, no matter how many times I know them and learn them. And yeah, it's always so yes. And I love that we're going to, we balance each other out, which is what we do in the world, right? We all balance each other out. And I just want to clarify too, is that everything that I'm going to say in any part of my life is coming from a place of love. And that includes helping people see where there is more opportunities for them to take those steps, and also to not apologize when you are curled up in a ball and you've got nothing and you can't do anything else. And if that happens over and over and over again, you don't apologize. You don't apologize for grief in any capacity. You just don't.
Ever.
Yeah.
Can I give you a high five like this? Can you do a high five?
Know, can we?
You got to go to the edge of your camera.
We go this way. We got to go this way.
High five.
I'm in reverse. My camera's
One,
in
two, we go. There we go. High five. Maybe two hands work better. And high five to you.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you for joining. I really appreciated this for so many reasons. It feels good to be able to be of service.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there's things that you would like us to discuss, please reach out, let us know. Bringjoyforward.com is where you'll find, everything. We're also on Facebook as well, and YouTube and all the podcast places and everything else. We are working professionals trying to do life as humans with a spiritual connection. And so bear with us as if we don't find you right away or see your comments right away, but feel free to share what works for you. We love comments and likes on all the places as well, because that helps us to reach more. But we just appreciate all of you being here and walking this journey with us. We appreciate you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Bring Joy Forward podcast. Conversations to explore, heal, and grow. You can find us at bringjoyforward.com, and we'd love to have you join us in our community Facebook group. Thank you for listening.